Hi there, and welcome to the Shure Creators channel, where in this series we're talking about podcasting. I'm Naomi Meller, the founder of the Skylark Collective and the International Women's Podcast Awards, and we're here today aboard the Boat Pod, where we're going to be taking you through the basics of starting a podcast. Many people never make a penny from their podcast. For a lot of people, it's a labour of love, a hobby, or a way to express your creativity. But what if you want more than that? What if your podcast needs to cover its own costs? Or what if you just want to make money from your show? Today, we're going to be talking about monetizing your podcast and the options that are out there. To kick off, we're going to look at podcast networks. A podcast network is basically a collection of shows where all of their listeners are available to advertisers as a oneer. What you're effectively doing is pooling your resources. Some podcast networks will make shows themselves. They allow commissions, they allow pitches, blah, 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 blah. Some of them don't. Some of them will take existing shows, and some of them only want new ones. Either way, what you're essentially doing is creating a collective of podcasts for brands and companies that want to advertise on podcasts. All of them together offer one large combined audience, and that is more attractive for different companies than individual podcasts with smaller listenerships. A podcast network essentially promotes and monetizes your show for you, increasing your visibility and allowing you to focus on content creation. As the networks are usually putting shows out to advertisers, often they'll have plenty of shows of similar genre under one umbrella. If you're an established show, the criteria for joining a network is usually associated with download numbers. And to be joining a network, you have to be punching out some pretty big scores. This isn't available to everybody, but if your show is doing really well, then joining a network might be a really, really good option for you. You can pitch a new show to a network or production company if you're confident that you've got a great idea and you're good at pitching. It's a little bit like pitching a new TV show, and it does take some skill. So if you're not used to that, it might not be an option for the faint-hearted. But if you're from a creative background, or you've got experience at pitching, or if you're just really confident at selling yourself, this can be an amazing option. There's no reason why you shouldn't get paid from the beginning for your show, and if you feel like that's an option for you, then do go for it. There's also the option of branded podcasts. If you know a brand that doesn't have a show and you think they need a podcast, then why not pitch that to them as an idea? It won't be your own baby, and you'll have to pitch the idea and get it through the marketing department of the company in question, but this can be a great way to be paid as a podcaster if that's what you're passionate about. For most of us though, you'll probably be going it alone. Under those circumstances, the two main options for monetization are sponsorship and advertising. Advertising usually happens through your hosting service and is similar to YouTube, where advertisers pick the content and it's inserted into your show. You'll usually be paid per 1,000 downloads that your episode receives. And for that reason, advertising is often a bit of a lower return than sponsorship, but it's also a lower input. You say that you want to monetize, you do that through your hosting service, and you get paid. That's it. You don't have to source companies that want to work with you, negotiate deals, or voice anything extra for your show. It's pretty simple, really. Sponsorship, on the other hand, tends to be a more personal affair. It's effectively still an advert that the sponsor is paying you for. But sponsors' adverts are usually voiced by the host, and it often has the feel of more of a personal recommendation. They're paying you for the trust that your listenership holds you in, and that when you tell people about brands that you love, they will listen. It's estimated that 65% of people will go and look at a brand that is voiced by a podcaster that they know and love. And that is a huge figure. That trust is worth a lot. And if you have a big audience, you can be asking for huge figures for sponsorship. Once you get successful, brands may approach you. But in the early stages, you may need to be pitching your podcast to brands for sponsorship. This is possible, I've done it, but it does take some time. You need to think about brands that you want to work with. Who will align well with your podcast? What are their values? What are your values? Who will go well with what you are talking about? Think about things that are complementary to the genre of your podcast. If you're a podcast about babies, then maybe think about mothers. What about the wellness industry? How are they going to look after themselves? You've got to think outside the box a bit. Loyalty is the key, and that comes through audience engagement. If your listeners are very engaged and you have really, really good following for your show, brands will lap up your podcast. This is what you need to try and cultivate if you're after sponsorship, and it's that kind of engagement that you can pitch. This is what will bring in the money for you, and this is what brands will be looking for when you want to work with them. One other small point. There's 3 types of sponsors ads: pre-roll, mid-roll, and post-roll. Guess which one is worth the most for a sponsor? If you guessed mid-roll, you would be right. Chances are some people will skip through the ads at the beginning, and they certainly hardly ever listen to the ads at the end. But in the middle, most people do not skip through the adverts. That is why they are of highest value, because they're most likely to be listened to by the people who are engaged with your show. That's worth a lot. If you're going to charge for your ads, charge more for your mid-roll than you do for your pre, and definitely more than you do for your post. An alternative option here is sponsored content, which is also known as partner-funded episodes. This isn't an advert at the beginning, middle, or end. This is an entire episode dedicated to whatever your partner is involved in. For example, if your podcast is about wine, then a vineyard owner might approach you, and they might want to be interviewed about how they grow their grapes, what the history of their vineyard is, how you actually make wine, etc., etc. It's essentially one long episode that's produced in a non-marketing fashion, but what you're essentially doing is marketing your guest. If you've got a podcast that explores a particular product or service, it might also be worth speaking to brands that might want to be featured on your podcast. So going back to the wine example, you might want to go out to vineyard owners and see if they might like to do a partner-funded episode. This can be a really good way of making some extra cash, but you probably don't want to do it too often. Sometimes these episodes can lack authenticity, and they do need to be produced in a non-cringy, non-marketing heavy way for them to be tolerated by your audience. They're good from time to time, but probably don't do too many. So that's direct monetization of your podcast from your episodes. But don't forget, there are loads of indirect ways that you can make money from your podcast too. Lots of shows have merchandise. You can sell them on your website. Maybe it's tote bags or water bottles or items of clothing. These can be a really nice way to improve the visibility of your podcast as a brand. And if you want to add a philanthropic element, then giving a percentage of your profits to charity can be a really nice way to build trust with your audience as well. If you've mentioned certain products or services on your show that you'd be happy to recommend to others, then why not think about affiliate links that you can put in your show notes? Amazon do loads of these, and if there's particular brands or products that you mention regularly, then why not approach them and ask about affiliate programs? Every time one of your listeners buys something through the link that you provide, you'll get a little kickback, usually 10 to 15%. And it's a nice way of sharing your recommendations with others. The amounts may be small, but they do add up. Talking about small amounts, why not consider listener contributions as a way of helping out with your podcast? There are platforms that are completely dedicated to this, such as Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. And the amounts usually are quite little, but they can really help with the running costs of your show. Many of these platforms also allow you to build a community behind the scenes, offering bonus content or additional extras in return for a little amount that people will contribute on a monthly or sometimes weekly basis. These are really, really nice, and often these communities can build over a period that will allow you to grow them into something bigger. Finally, don't forget about secondary sales from your podcast. If you've got a podcast and you've got a business, whether they're related or not, why not use your podcast as an opportunity to mention your product, your service, or the course that you might be offering? You are your own best advocate, and your podcast can slot really neatly into everything else that you do. The take-home message on monetization is that the sky is the limit. Be bold, be brave, and don't forget that your podcast is all about you, and you can do whatever you like with it. This is the final episode in this series for now, but if you've enjoyed it, then why not share it on your own social media or just tell someone else about it? We'd really appreciate it if you subscribe, and if there's anything we haven't covered in this series that you really want to hear about, then definitely drop it in the comments below. Thanks for watching.